There you go. Recording is in progress. I like that. Right. So the purpose of this webinar is just to get us have some insights into how governance framework shape the success of projects, programs, and portfolios. We will explore how organizations can design governance structures that ensure accountability, strategic alignment, and value realization without the necessary bureaucracy or stifling innovation. Through our experts that you can see there, and I think you know most, if not all of them, this webinar will help attendees understand how governance can be an enabler of success rather than just a compliance mechanism. This session will provide practical strategies, real-world examples, and expert insights that attendees can apply within their own organizations. So just a note that after the webinar, maybe sometime next week, I will send out some info pack, which is so full of information in there, with some insights that we have discussed today and some insights that our panelists feel they can share with you. And some of them can be very generous. So just look at your inbox and make sure it doesn't go into the trash. Right, let's get started. Our initial round is just going to address those 4 questions that you saw in the promo when we're promoting the event. And we'll start with Nicola. You introduce yourself and then you go into the question that we'll pose here. And then we'll move on to the next person, and the next person. And then we come back to me and Mike is going to look after, is it Mentimeter, Mike?
It is, yes.
Yes, good. Mentimeter. So we have a few questions there that we'll ask you to sort of respond to, and then we'll continue discussions. It's going to be very interactive after this. Right. So Nicola, how can governance frameworks be designed to enable rather than hinder effective delivery?
Thanks, Kosam, and kia ora tātou. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real honour to be on this panel with such esteemed panelists and also such an esteemed audience as well. So my name's probably there and below my face. My name's Nicola Faithfull. I've been in project and program and portfolio management for over 20 years. I ran the EPMO for the University of Auckland for about 10 years. And I'm still with the university in a part-time capacity looking after some of the larger business transformation programs. Well, I should say along with lots of other fabulous colleagues. And I have my own consultancy business and have consulted on governance and portfolios and projects to a number of organizations. And I was, up until the end of last year, president of PMINZ, as Kosam was 2 presidents before me. And I'm pleased to still be on the board, but no longer president. So turning to that question that's been posed, how governance frameworks can be designed to enable rather than hinder effective delivery. In my view, all good frameworks should be designed to be flexible, and governance frameworks in particular need to acknowledge that there are multiple layers of governance. For example, the governance of a 9-month duration project is going to look quite different to the governance of an organization's total investment in change. The principles of good governance remain no matter what the scale, but the design of a specific governance group will vary widely. So the framework should start with gaining understanding of the scale and complexity of the portfolio program or project to be governed, then turn to how the principles of good governance can be applied in the lightest and the most effective way, with an inbuilt bias towards getting to value faster. And I know that value was something that Iain will be talking about very effectively shortly. In my experience, governance groups can too quickly become focused on the what of the portfolio and the project and too quickly lose sight of the why. So whether the portfolio or project is geared towards new innovative products or reducing organizational risk or both, there should be a clear line of sight between the intended benefits or value to be delivered and the project or portfolio. And it might seem obvious, but I think it's important to emphasize at the very first meeting of a new governance group or at regular intervals, if it's an enduring governance group, the purpose of the time, money, and people being invested. So, the why. And to keep that front of mind in all the meetings, particularly if you're signing off plans or changes, and being really careful and mindful not to add work that isn't directed towards that value or benefit. And we all learn about the dreaded scope creep on probably the first day of project management training, or if not that, then day 2. And there's a good reason for that, because as well as adding cost, it gets in the way of effective delivery because it diverts effort and attention. But scope creep, as we know, can be a sneaky beast. It doesn't front up to the governance meetings wearing a big T-shirt saying, "Hi, I'm scope creep." It can be much more insidious than that. And it can find its way into plans here and there. And in the limited time that a governance group will be meeting and has time, it's difficult for them to really identify when activity is being wasted and delivery is impacted. So the governance mechanisms that I've seen that address that problem most effectively are, firstly, leading with a laser focus on the intended benefits and value that I've just mentioned, and I know other speakers will follow up on. Secondly, decentralized decision making, and thirdly, shorter monitor and adjust cycles. We see these mechanisms present in agile frameworks, but they can be incorporated in conventional governance structures too. And I'll give a brief example from the University of Auckland. We have a strategic pillar that has a significant number of initiatives. Some are large, some are small. And if each of those initiatives were going to have their own governance group, it would tie up a lot of both executive time and administrative time. We're all familiar with how long it takes to prepare papers for a governance meeting. And when an initiative is rather small and straightforward, that time just can't be justified against the level of risk to be managed. So therefore, in this particular portfolio, there is one overarching portfolio governance group that's responsible for all the initiatives, but it only directly governs the top 2 or 3, those with the most significant organizational impact. And governance of the other initiatives is delegated to the key senior stakeholders to lead within agreed guardrails. Those stakeholders are expected to monitor and report on their initiative, and larger ones may use the same project status reporting of the big 2 or 3. But the minimum requirement is to provide key metrics on the progress of the initiative, plus any risks, barriers, and so on, into a portfolio dashboard that's available to the portfolio governance group online. So they can look at that whenever they choose to, but it is noted by them in their regular meetings. And I think at the moment that this particular one is meeting every 6 weeks. They can ask for more information if they feel they need it. They could ask for someone, one of those senior stakeholders to present at their portfolio governance meeting if they feel they need more of a discussion. And obviously, if any one of those initiatives are having some serious impactful issues, then they can self-escalate as well. And what it means is that the decision makers are much closer to the initiative. They have close visibility of all aspects of the initiative, and it allows those initiatives to continue at pace without delays that we sometimes see with more formal governance arrangements. I have other examples, but I'm going to stop there because I know Kosam gave us a time limit on this. So I'll pass back to, I think, Cristine, or perhaps to you, Kosam. Thank you.
Cristine, you can take this up. Maybe start off by telling us who you are. I know you are, but I just played dumb in this case. If you can just tell us who you are, and then you answer the question, what role does leadership play in ensuring accountability while fostering innovation? Over to you, Cristine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cristine Yip. I'm a business advisor. I've got extensive experience working in global company, nationwide organization, including council and private organization. Some of my past portfolio has been implementing and designing innovation strategy and implementing some of those projects in organization-wide. in a number of places. So the innovation is something that I'm very passionate about, clearly, and I've even written a book about it. The challenges when innovation meet with governance, and that is where things can get a little bit interesting, can be challenging. We have seen over the past couple of years, the technology has changed the landscape somewhat. I think it's probably an understatement, somewhat. That we have got Gen AI, we've got blockchain. We are seeing the world that we're operating in will change radically, and possibly to a point that we cannot even imagine with our current understanding. And what does it mean for governance? What does that mean in holding people accountable? And that's something that feels like there's a bit of catching up to do. Delivery of innovation project is something that I've got extensive experience in, and that's the kind of for the leader to be able to communicate and work through a number of different layers. I think this is the part that really can make a significant difference in terms of the outcome and performance. I've actually personally analyzed as an academic, as well as being in industry with my experience. I think there are 3 levels, and I think, I can put it out there and see if you agree with me. First of all, there's the one layer of the governance is on at the organization level, where we've got a board, we've got a CEO, we've got the exec team. You've got to drive the ship. You've got to actually keep it going enough until things change. But you've got to keep the light on enough with the new initiative coming in, because the future is actually happening faster than we expected. So the decision making and who's responsible for making those decisions, that layer is challenging in itself, and I can understand that. I appreciate that. This is the first level. Second level, we've got project governance. So we've got portfolio management, we've got program layer, we've got individual project. And there's actually a lot of layer. And despite that we have got scale agile, it doesn't really make it any easier. We actually spend a lot of time doing reporting. There's still a lot of unknown because a lot of projects are working in silo. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is from what we're seeing in New Zealand and global wide, and that's for those leaders who actually wanting to drive better performance, to actually solve some of this problem. How could teams work better together so that we can actually connect all the delivery into a cohesive action? Okay. Another layer that I'm seeing from the innovation point of view and technical point of view is that there's technical governance. Do we, or do the organization, has got the technical governance capability? Do we have enough understanding? When things are changing so much, do we have one CIO to really advocating, trying to educate everyone? Or as the board and as the other executives ready to embrace and learn together? Now, all of these parts are going to make a significant difference to the organization performance from now going into the future. And that's something that I think, yes, is challenging. Okay, we've got a lot of uncertainty in the world, but let's embrace the challenge, right? I think you've got to gamify innovation. You've got to make it fun. You can't just take on innovation like, yeah, everybody's doing Gen AI. Therefore, we've got to have to do blockchain, Gen AI, put the whole lot in there. You've got to really, rationalize what you're actually doing and what sort of outcome are you driving. And from there, do we have enough accountability and responsibility? Are people really clear in the organization who's going to deliver what with with a shared purpose? And I think that shared purpose is so important in governance. If we've got a team that work together from board level to exec to project level, it's going to deliver the performance that we expected. And what happened is when you don't actually work together and work in silo, the layer becomes so significant. There's communication gap, there's waste of resources, and by the time you actually focus, you've actually lost a lot of opportunity. And that's the last thing we want in business. Now, I know that New Zealand has been going through some recession, and let's face it, it has been a challenging 2024. But I'd like to instill the optimism that this is something that every leader and everyone in organization can work together and take ownership and makes a difference to the organization, to the project, and possibly to the wider economy. And I think the fact that if we have got that level of leadership and ownership, you're likely to see significant improvement in performance. So that's where I'm at. And yeah, I welcome some feedback and feel free to contact me if we want to discuss this further.
Thanks very much, Cristine. Nicola and Cristine have shared some very good insights, and some themes are beginning to emerge. I will not delve into them now because we are simply scratching the surface. So dig deeper just after Iain and Adrian tackle their questions. And talking about Iain and tackling, tell us something about how organizations measure success beyond outputs, ensuring real benefits are realized. And I'm sure you'll talk about value as well. Over to you, Iain.
It seems, thank you, Kosam. It seems that my secret is out. Hey, look, wonderful. Great to have the opportunity to share some thoughts and views and swap notes with everybody, actually. And I'm particularly looking forward to the open Q&A thing down the line a little bit. So I'll keep this as short as I possibly can. My name is Iain Fraser. I speak with a modified Invercargill accent. I live in Wellington. I've had the great fortune to work around the world with many organizations across many sectors. And from all of that experience has given me, I think, some of the thoughts that I share with others. It's given me some other thoughts that I don't share and are probably not worth sharing, but that's a different story. I've been an EPMO manager. At a capital level, reporting directly to the board of directors of a big power company. I've consulted since. I'm a multi-published author. I've written 28 white papers, 2 business books, and one of the chaps on this call is twisting my arm to get my act together to publish my 3rd book, which is a completely different story. So look, I like writing. More to the point, I think it's about looking around the world, and some of you I think know I was chairman of the board of directors of PMI when PMI decided to go global, and that was it's one of my proudest volunteer points, that we actually took that business case, we thrashed it out through the board, and at the end of it, being chair when the vote overwhelmingly said yes, we have to take PMI to a global organization, was immensely satisfying, as you can all imagine. Yeah. So look, with that said, to the question, and let me just paraphrase it again, if you may. How do organizations measure success beyond outputs, ensuring real benefits are realized? I think, Kosam, you set me up for this one. I think my first comment, I've got three kind of ways of approaching this. I think the first comment I would make, and I would change that, if I may, to how should, perhaps, might be the better expression, because in my observations, and I suspect many people, if not all people in this call, we see a mixed bag of approaches, we see a mixed bag of results. And as I think as Nicola and Cristine have mentioned, there's a need to be better. And in the world that we face, in the world that we're a difficult world that we're going to face again and again and again, we need to do better. We need to think differently. And that kind of leads us to the age of simplification. So to me, measuring success. Now, remember, the topic of this is delivery governance, but you cannot just isolate delivery governance on its own without looking at a more holistic perspective. And I think Nicola kind of hinted at a few of those aspects of it. You've got to look at the bigger picture. And the biggest problem we have within our profession is that strategies are failing. There's a massive gulf between what strategies intend and what's actually delivered. Meanwhile, there's massive waste based on research that we're all available to review, massive waste of delivery endeavors. So delivery is failing at an alarming rate and continues to fail at an alarming rate, despite best efforts of many people and organizations in different parts of the world. Strategies continue to fail at a staggering rate of 74%. So we have to think differently. We have to do things differently. And we need to, as leaders, take what I call a courageous step forward and change the way we do things, not build another framework, not build another process, and certainly not build another set of templates or stuff. So I think we need to elevate our game. And in that, then becomes the issue about the role that EPMOs, and I think, Nicola, you touched on that, enterprise portfolio management, or whatever one calls them, or if you like, value management offices, and you knew I was going to use that word at some point. I was traveling recently in Chile, and I coined the frame value influencers might be a thing of the future, because the world, and social media in particular, seems to be awash with influencers. Perhaps it's our turn to adopt the term value influencers. So on behalf of our organizations, maybe we could adopt that. Here's what I think we need to do. We need to elevate portfolio up into a more strategic perspective and help executives, the executives that you were talking about, Cristine, in one of your 3 points here, help them get up and elevate and think differently. We need, and think beyond just dollars and cents, profitability, cost, money, OPEX, CAPEX. Nothing wrong with that. I'm Scottish, I get that. But we need to look further and beyond that and balance that. They can't do it on their own. They need help. And I think a value office or a bunch of value influencers are the best place to do that. So we raise the profile of portfolio to a more strategic level with the intention of reducing this 74% failure rate, but also at the same time improving delivery rates down through programs of work and projects, etc., etc. So in terms of measures, that then begins to inform a range of different measures. At the highest level, the value influencer, value office level, then the measures really are referring straight back to the business objectives that have been set for the organization. Nothing more, nothing else required. Tie right back to those, because if we can tie back to them, then very quickly we'll get an early warning signal as to whether we're good, bad, or indifferent, whether there's some intervention required, whether there's some survival or revival techniques, intervention required, etc., etc. So that's the first thing. I think if we can do that, meanwhile, remember that we've informed how those business objectives have been set by introducing the notion of value and value driving a portfolio decision-making mantra or culture, if you like, through the organization. So those business objectives become value-driven and begin to feed what I would term a value-driven portfolio management. That's number one. Number two then is, and we craft measures, a small number of measures, a sensible number of measures that allows us to do that. In terms of delivery through programs of work and projects, then I think the issue we have is that we kind of, as people, you know, I'm generalizing when I say this, we tend to overdo it. And we tend to, what I refer to, and I've used this expression before, we tend to put, hopefully you can see this, organizational handcuffs on the organization by swelling out the middle management layers of process and rules and compliance orientated stuff. And now I know there's exceptions to that, of course, but generally my observations, that's what we see. And therefore then we get surprised that nothing ever changes. So what we need to do then is develop measures that are cognizant towards what I refer to as the age of simplification, where we look to simplify stuff. We look to remove the handcuffs without necessarily stressing the organization in terms of risk, but we balance that. Prepared to take some risk that's considered, and I think Adrian will probably talk about that in a few minutes, I suspect. But we balance that, reduce the number of things, reduce the layers, and empower people more, program leaders, project leaders, empower them more to do what they're being employed to do. So to me, I think simplifying the measures, being very, very critical of what we need that's critical to the well-being of the organization, and actually be courageous enough to get rid of everything else. I think that would be a path forward. That would be a good step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iain. Great conversation there. I mean, the questions that are popping up already. So keep those questions coming. We'll come back to those. It's now Adrian's turn. Funny story about Adrian is I first met his book before meeting him. And I said, I need to get this guy to our conference. So he did come to our conference. He's coming to this CS conference as well. Adrian, over to you to talk about what governance approaches help mitigate risks while maintaining responsiveness in dynamic environments.
Thank you, Kosam, and thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm actually based in Brisbane, but I operate domestically and internationally. I've been around projects, programs, and portfolios for over 30 years in a professional services environment. I mainly work now with organisations to enhance the outcomes from their investments in projects, programs, and portfolios by implementation of fit-for-purpose tailored frameworks, whether they be at project, program, or portfolio level, governance arrangements, or helping them mobilise or recover their most complex initiatives. I have a particular interest and a bit of a governance geek, and was co-author of a book called Project, Program, Portfolio Governance, which has become a global best practice guide, which is the book that Kosam referred to. And so going back to the question, governance approaches to mitigate risks while maintaining responsiveness in dynamic environments. A lot of words in there, but let's unpick some of that. So what is governance at the end of the day? At the heart of governance is decision making. And so if we focus on that, what we're really then looking at is how decisions are made within that P3 environment, project, program, portfolio, governance environment. But what necessarily needs to be twinned with that is accountability. So if we say decision-making is empowerment, often then we need to make sure that we make people accountable for certain outcomes or outputs, and then we give them decision rights. So we're twinning then accountability. So if you then look at the sort of P3 environment at the project level, you have a project manager who's then accountable for the delivery of certain outputs. Maybe at the then project executive level or project sponsor level, that person is accountable for the success of that project, realizing the outcomes and benefits. And then they sit within a broader ecosystem of potentially programs and the wider portfolio. At each of those levels, there's different accountabilities, and logically that needs to be then twinned with logical decision rights, empowerment. If you don't twin accountability empowerment appropriately, you can distort decision making, you can distort the outcomes from your governance arrangements. If you make an accountable person or you don't give an accountable person appropriate delegated decision rights, you're setting themselves up for fail. Equally, if somebody is given decision rights and they're not accountable for something, again, you'll end up with distorted outcomes. So if we nest that sort of concept of accountability and empowerment within a broader ecosystem, those accountable people tend then to be surrounded by others who help them make optimal decisions. And so typically that's embedded in the construct of governance groups, whether they be steering committees, boards. And so the concept there is then you should have an accountable person who then is empowered to make decisions, but they then have a wrapper around them of people with appropriate interests, skin in the game, insights to make appropriate decisions. And that's important to understand because often we confuse governance groups with decision making. Governance groups don't make decisions. The accountable people should make those decisions. And that's an operable word. And going back to what Iain said, should, because often we actually say that governance groups make decisions and then we actually abrogate the accountability and the empowerment of the accountable people, which is really then distorting how decision making should work within that ecosystem. So it's important we understand that and construct decision making processes accordingly. Equally, we then need to push down those delegated authorities, and this is something that Nicola mentioned, to the lowest practicable level. So we don't want to, in a dynamic environment, as we said here, and in a responsive environment, we don't want decisions bubbling up to senior levels that should be made at a lower level within the ecosystem. 80% of day-to-day decisions within projects should be made within the project itself. Only things that are material should bubble up to governance groups. And when we talk about what's material, risks are material, absolutely. But there's key decisions that exceed the delegated authority informed by tolerances at each of those levels within an ecosystem. So then it's those key decisions and approvals. It's exceptions. It's maybe resource allocation. It's maybe then those key risks and issues, or it may be something that has an interdependency that can't be managed within a particular part of that governance ecosystem. So those are the material matters. Too often, we spend too much time in governance groups talking about progress. Things should focus on those material matters, the exceptions, and then focus the attention of that cohort, that governance group, on what's important. Yes, progress is important, performance reporting is important, but that should be taken as read. Typically, there are reports provided to governance groups and the accountable people. And so if we operate on that principle, then we become more focused on what's important, on those risks, and we can be more responsive in those environments to what's important. And I think that's critical. So there's two things here. Let's delegate it to the lowest practicable level, and helping that is the concept of minimal viable governance. We don't want to overcook governance by creating groups if they don't need to exist. And I think Cristine mentioned that you need to kind of, or no, Nicola mentioned that maybe through the use of shared boards or shared governance groups and appropriately sort of supporting structures, have that concept of minimal viable governance. Always critically assess, do we need that governance group? Do we need that particular construct in the hierarchy? Do we need a particular way of reporting? Equally, then I'd encourage you to always think about in your governance environments, what's important, those material matters. And with the pack that Kosam's going to circulate next week, there's a one page that I'll circulate on material matters. But I think if we think about those things, governance is around decision making. So we need to twin accountability and empowerment, minimal viable governance, distilling decisions down to the lowest practical level, and focus on material matters. We can be responsive and focus on what's important.
Right, thank you so much, Adrian. Right, we are now into the meat of things, and to get us started, I guess Mike will just get us into Mentimeter. The question there will be around what challenges you are facing or what you think are the greatest challenges that you are facing. And as those load up into Mentimeter, we'll be tackling some of the things. So over to you, Mike, in terms of instructions on how to do this.
Yeah, thanks, Kosam. So you haven't seen Mentimeter before, if you just grab your cell phone or open up a web browser and go to the site www.menti.com. It's at the top of the screen. That's MENTI. And then it'll ask you for an 8-digit code. That code is also up on the screen. So if you enter that in, you'll get a question on that device and would like you to share your thoughts on that question. What's your biggest challenge or your main challenge as far as all things governance is concerned? When you hit submit, they'll start appearing on our screen here, and then we'll go over back to Kosam, and he can sort of facilitate a conversation with the panel around those.
While we're waiting for those, I'll go back to the panel and just ask if there is anything that you want to fill in terms of what others were addressing. Feel free to pitch in, or we could go into the questions, but I would rather sort of rehash what we have talked about. I guess we can go into the questions. Iain, there was a question about that 75% you mentioned, the failure rate. Is there any cause or category? Michael, do you want to talk about that? We want to hear from you also.
I'm quite keen to talk about the second one, to be honest. Getting action taken on risks. Do you want to provide a comment on that now, Kosam?
Yeah, I was looking at the questions in the chat first.
Oh, the chat.
Yeah, there are a few questions that were put in there. We're just waiting for the audience to populate the Mentimeter, and then we'll look at the sort of things that are popping up.
Okay, so I think, Iain, this is a question that popped up when you were speaking around, so that 74% failure rate. Do you know the details in terms of, what that failure is caused by, or some of the key categories behind that?
Yes, look good. Little bit putting on the spot. So the information, the research is from the Economist Intelligence Unit, based in London. And they obviously are the research engine for The Economist magazine, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with, well-respected publication. Some years ago, they published this, and the 74% was a figure of all organizational strategies fail. Now, I look right now, I don't have the data in terms of the specific details of how they failed, but what springs to mind was there was a couple of key pointers that the EIU commented upon. One was really poor awareness of external input drivers. So that's like macro drivers that should be informing a board of directors and an executive team to kind of begin to think possibly differently, et cetera, et cetera. And when you think about that point alone in today's VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex ambiguity, they go, crikey, well, if we go wrong at that first point, everything below that is going to be problematic. It's not to say it can't be done, but it's going to be problematic in terms of getting what I refer to as strategic alignment. The second point was vague guidance. Get this, vague guidance in terms of poor. So whatever the strat plan was called in terms of its publication and downstream communication, really poor. That was identified as point number 2. So, the aspect of vagueness and communication probably go hand in glove. And look, for the life of me, I can't actually remember the other ones. But so it was the Economist Intelligence Unit, why good strategies fail, and external input drivers, macro drivers, scenario planning type stuff, really vague internal communications, which basically led to delivery teams kind of trying to fill in the gaps and make stuff up. I'm not saying, I'm exaggerating when I say make stuff up, but kind of winging it a little bit. So you misalign or you develop misalignment. So hopefully that helps, Mike. Who asked that question?
Michael Martin.
Oh, Michael. Oh, right. Hi, Michael.
He also had a follow-up question, and while you're talking about value, and can you help by sharing a bit of a definition of value? He asks, is this just dollars and cents, or is it more to it than that?
Oh, brilliant.
I have to give you a bit of a time box here, Iain.
So. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
He's on a roll now.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah. Hey, look, brilliant question, actually. And of course, value is or should be seen as more than just dollars and cents. Dollars and cents is important, of course, but I think value can be expressed in different ways now. And I think in terms of a definition, I would start with this. The perceived value, either tangible or intangible, to stakeholders. As simple as that. Now, there are various international standards that quote value as some financial ratio that divides cost by resource and gives a ratio of 1.3, for example, which is purely monetary. And I think, again, today's fast-moving world is causing leaders to think differently. We need to express value in a much more holistic construct than perhaps we've done in the past. So hopefully that helps, Michael. Michael Martin, that is, not Michael Roberts. Michael Shan Roberts.
Thanks, Iain.
Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Well, that's the 2 questions we had in the chat. So let's move over to what we have up on screen here. Who can comment from the panel around the challenges of governance with a brand new exec team?
I could make a comment there, Mike, and it's really related to those many other questions around how do you educate governance members in governance, particularly when they're often very reluctant to be educated because maybe they think they know it all, or they're time poor, or whatever. And like everyone else, I think, judging by the questions, you know, I've experienced this challenge also. One of the ways, I don't think there is an easy answer. I think you've got to adapt your approach to the organization and to the people. But some of the ways that we've found to address this are, we don't call it training, that we execs sometimes have a nervous reaction to the word training. So we've put on what we call governance masterclasses. So we acknowledge they are already masters, but that we are just having a class of fabulous governance people coming together and sharing, you know, their best practice. We're not telling them. And we try to get to those some really senior people in the organization where others will want to come to listen to them and to have the opportunity to sit in the same room as them. And rather than, you know, taking them through a handbook on governance, much as we would love to do that, we pose questions to them about what has good governance looked like to you and your experience, and get them to have the conversation, and, you know, equally what does not such great governance look like. So that have found in the past that to be quite successful, and it tends to have people a bit more engaged. Another method is to help new execs to find people who can mentor them in governance, and people who are more experienced. Obviously, again, they have to be able to accept that. So, you know, you can be a bit like scope creep, a little sneaky about how you put that forward, and, you know, potentially, you know, don't cage it quite in those sort of very direct words. And just one last one is that we know that organizations tend to listen to consultants a lot more than they do to people in their own organization. So sometimes we've had external consultants come in and talk about why governance is, what does effective governance look like, and, you know, why it's so important and what their role really should be. And we tend to do that also at the very first, if it's a new governance group, at the very first meeting. So they think they're coming to the very first governance meeting. What they don't realize is that the first maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes is going to be about good governance, because otherwise they might not turn up. So a little bit sneaky, but you know, it has worked at times.
Education through stealth, right?
Yeah.
It's a great tactic. No one goes to governance school before picking up a governance position, so you got to take ownership as a project manager or a program manager to initiate that. So I like that.
I'd like to add
Mike,
to.
Oh, sorry, you go, Christine.
Let's go, Christine,
Yeah.
first. Yep.
Yes, that's right. I'd like to add to Nicola's point, because I think those activities certainly really useful from a technology perspective. There are governance software that actually provide that sort of structure. So having a new executive team coming together and actually working on a 90-day baseline, in that case, you actually get to embrace what the new structure look like the functionality, and actually talking about how all of them working together as a team, and having a software, having a certain facilitator be able to structurally put some of these like connection in place, the value, the milestone, and actually, looking at which project or portfolio actually still aligned or not aligned. This is actually a great problem-solving opportunity where you get an exciting piece of work done as part of team building, as pragmatic. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Thanks, Christine. Adrian.
Yeah, a technique that I often employ, and it kind of goes back to the comment you made, Mike, around stealth, is instead of, and thoroughly support Nicola's view of probably inducting any new group and working with maybe the chair of that group or the sponsor beforehand if they're open to that. But one of the things that I'm often involved in is actually as an expert observer in governance groups. And I'm there for maybe one of two purposes or both, either as an independent expert to actually take an active part in the meeting and contribute in terms of effective governance. And that's an ideal situation. Maybe comment in terms of some of the sort of focus on the right things. But what that allows me is also an opportunity to see the governance practice, or the governance practice is actually in action. And then either through direct discussion with the chair or a sort of presentation back to the overall group, look at how to actually move forward with better governance practices. Because at the end of the day, even with the best sort of governance frameworks and processes, governance is the nexus of structure, process, and people, and it's where the people get involved that things can get distorted. But the other thing is actually to be a silent observer, and sometimes it's that stealth mode where it's made aware to the cohort that I am there, but my role is to observe the meeting and then provide feedback, either directly to the meeting at the end of the day in terms of what went well, what didn't go well, or what can be improved. But also sometimes I'm installed there to actually work with the chairs in a non-confrontational an after or in-camera sort of role, to actually look at how they can actually get better outcomes out of the meeting. And that's important. So better outcomes out of the governance, not improve their competence. And that gets away with some of the issues around them feeling as though they should know everything. Actually, you're actually by stealth informing them in terms of what their competencies are or should be, and working with them to actually build their capability. But you're doing that through a frame of how do you actually get better outcomes from the group.
Excellent. Thanks, Adrian. Hey, look, Kosam, I'll just carry on, but feel free to interrupt. I'll let you be the timekeeper. I just like to comment on the second option there around getting action, taking on risks. It's not enough to just acknowledge them. Just a bit of a personal story, which I sort of found myself as a program manager, I guess, hitting my head up against the wall after about 6 months of governance meetings, raising risks, and nothing being done about them other than, okay, thanks, Mike. We'll see you in a month's time. And I didn't do this intentionally, this was accidentally. I was having conversations with other layers of management, and all it took was me to have a conversation with someone else and them to understand what the impacts of this risk were or could be to their particular department or their division, and then them to talk to the governance group or them to talk to the sponsor, effectively saying the same thing that I've been saying it, but just from a different voice, maybe with a different tone, maybe with a different relationship. That was all it took to get some momentum there. So if you're facing that problem and you haven't tried that, just use sort of a two-step approach, a pincer approach to try and get that influence.
The other thing there, Mike, is working on that same sort of concept, is if you get no response on a particular risk in a meeting and it's a material risk, you turn the language around and you're saying, well, okay, if we're not going to take any action on this, you are saying as a group and as an accountable person, you accept this risk. And so sometimes that language, they go, oh, I actually don't accept that risk. Well, what are we going to do about it?
Excellent. And come back to that previous point that Nicola was saying, do they actually know they're accountable? So that language will make it quite clear. So excellent. Keen to jump down to this point down here, getting informed decisions for complex issues when governance groups are short on time. The higher up in the organization you go, the less time they have. So how do you get proper understanding and proper decisions here? Maybe it goes to you, Adrian, because you talked about sort of bringing governance
Okay.
down to a
Yeah.
more
All
viable
right.
governance layer.
And this is a common issue in governance sort of ecosystems, where you get sort of super busy executives at certain levels within the organization, and certain levels in the sort of P3 environment and governance ecosystem. So governance isn't just about what happens in the meeting. So there's a lot of activity that should take place between meetings. And one of those things is actually, whether it be your PMO or if Iain was in control, your VMO, working to actually put forward different options, different recommendations, but then socializing those. Don't just wait for it all to happen in the room. Look to actually socialize those, go through and start actually identifying whether there is support or otherwise, where there are contrary views. So then you can actually come into the session with a considered view, and maybe everybody's aware of that matter. So then they can focus on where there are, maybe contrary views, or where there needs to be a consideration of options, as opposed to just, this is the first time we've seen it, and also expecting busy people to have read the papers. That just doesn't happen all the time. It can do with those that understand the purpose of these meetings and their own accountabilities. But if you've socialized it, if you've had some discussions in advance, you can often cut through some of that. And certainly then your VMO, your PMO has made recommendations that are valid, have been tested, and maybe then there's an opportunity to come to an agreed position.
I think adding to Adrian's point, I think additionally, the informal communication channel across the organization is quite important, right? And when we talk about feedback channel, actually there's a statistic here, 80% of people feel that feedback only happens when things go wrong. So, and in the decision making and governance of trying to steer to better outcome and better performance, if we don't actually have got all this communication that happen in place and in a consistent manner, you're going to see that the cultural breakdown, the value is not shared, and at the end of the day, people are not held accountable. So I think that part is an important element in terms of actually driving people more accountable.
Yeah, if I may step in a little bit, maybe this question will be for Nicola in terms of where you see the EPMO role in terms of making sure that the governance or decision makers get the information that they need to make decisions on, maybe summarizing some of the huge papers like business cases and the like. What's your thought on that?
My thought is it's a challenge. People who are preparing papers, from my experience, and I know organizations are all different. I've worked in the university sector for a long time, where particularly those close to the academic parts of the university tend to think more is more when it comes to papers. And those who are looking at the papers often think that the purpose of receiving a paper is to market and point out all the things that are wrong with it. And so I think, but other organizations will have other sort of cultural challenges around this. So one of the mindsets that we try to lead out on is, less is more. Your key message that you're trying to get across to your governance group is going to be lost if you are spending a whole lot of time making the words very elegant and lengthy. So, people often say, I'm sorry, this is so long, I didn't have time to make it short. But in fact, trying to be as succinct as possible. And really, in a governance meeting, you're not, you shouldn't be telling the whole story. In a governance meeting, only, let's say 20% of the time should be looking at the status, and 80% of the time should be looking at what's coming up ahead, and are we ready for it, and what sort of pitfalls do we see coming up? Is the organization well positioned for it? So it's a struggle, and I'm really hopeful that AI will help with this, with its ability to get out really good data insights, showing patterns, showing trends, that it will assist people to move away from thinking that they've got to do sort of long commentary papers, particularly in status reports.
Thanks,
I hope
Nicola. I
that-
recall someone presenting on that topic at a conference, a PMINZ conference a few years ago around governance messaging, and the advice was less news, more weather. Give more information around what's coming up rather than focusing on what's here and gone, because you want decisions to try and navigate the future. So that's a little
Yeah.
saying that sort of stuck with me. So,
I like that.
yeah.
I'll steal
Iain,
that.
can I throw this one to you, please? This is probably not really governance, it's more personality. A governance chair or co-chair not interested in taking governance advice. They know it all because they are an executive. What comments do you have around dealing with maybe these sort of dominant red executives who have been there, done it all, and can't be told or given some advice around doing things differently? Oh, you're on mute there, Iain. Iain, you're on mute there. There we go. Gotcha.
My apologies. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, a bit of the old chestnut, that one, isn't it? Great question, and pops up periodically. Hey, look, a couple of things. First of all, somewhat tongue-in-cheek comment. If you're an employee of that organization, probably good to keep your CV up to date in that environment if you're in a governance role. Just in case. More seriously, perhaps, look, we can't ignore that sometimes this is reality. In my experience in various governance roles, it's a minority, not a majority, so that's a good thing. Let's hope it stays like that. Look, again, I touch on something that, Mike, is close to my own heart. If you're in the role of a PMO manager, VPMO manager, or even a program of work manager, or even a project manager, and you're in front of some governance chair or co-chair to the question, and they're just not interested, then I think that's where one's power skills start to come into play. And I think as we all should know in this call, PMI put a big emphasis on that, which is terrific, actually, because that is the future. So power skills can manifest themselves in different way, but for what it's worth, I'll give you my kind of collection of them. One is having the ability to influence. And again, going right to the question, if you can influence, I think it was, who was it? The 21 Irrefutable Laws of business. Number one was influence. So look, if you can influence, together with effective communication, and the third one, empathy, then you can begin to move people along a little bit. However, you've got to be able to understand these people and somewhat try and put yourselves inside their minds, because you don't want to throw at them, to Nicola's great point, the 36-page report. They're absolutely not interested. You don't want to throw at them, XYZ bit of theory or the latest trend or whatever it is. You just want to reach into their hearts and heads and connect with them in a way that they feel comfortable with. And then you have the influence aspect where you can communicate effectively with them and try and move them from whatever position they're in at that particular point to a position, at least, maybe not necessarily where you want them initially, but at least to a position where they begin to be a bit more receptive to, say, solution options, for example, going back to maybe linking a couple of the previous conversations together. Mike, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's sort of, again, doing it by stealth, sort of one step at a time,
Yeah.
sowing a seed and
Yeah.
seeing where it sort of germinates, and then just keep building momentum from there.
You bet.
So it might take a couple of years to change their views, but at least you're working on it.
Well, I think Cristine hinted at, the informal communications is part of that effective communications. If an effective communicator isn't all about formality, it's about how one uses your informal skill set, the stuff that's, that's off the record, out of the office sometimes even, down the corridor, round the coffee machine, you know, the kind of classic analogies, you know. Yeah.
And the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership was John C. Maxwell.
That's the one I was trying to refer to. Thank you. I couldn't get the recall quick enough. Thank you. Yeah.
All good.
Yeah, I think
oh, sorry, Cristine. Yeah, go for it.
in my personal experience, and that's partly why on this particular topic, yeah, like Iain, you came from like probably the top down, right? That's the formality. I'm specialized in sometimes informal, and almost like if you've got the ability to understand the whole strategy of the organization and be able to communicate and align with your initiative, with the agenda of the organization and the executive, that's really effective in terms of getting your case across. So, you know, these sort of things, and sometimes communication, if you I think that in terms of like, you know, project manager or business analyst, sometimes you're just so focused on writing those papers. Words are sometimes only 7%, and you know your delivery, you know, your ability to resonate and connect with people, all these other P's are your influencing, you know, ability to be able to get something across and actually lift your priority a bit more, where governance can be made, you know, a lot more consistently as part of the wider team with your feedback. So I'd like to see more of that happening, and I think people feeling empowered to be able to do that in their position.
Indeed. And then you've got some leaders who are open to those discussions, and some leaders are very closed and locked down. I sort of joke when I say this, but I'm also quite serious. I think as value influencers or project managers or program managers, I think we should have quite a substantial coffee budget in our back pocket. And you know, you can get a lot of work done over a coffee or over a beer through a casual conversation rather than a forced conversation. Again, it'll be subtle, but building a relationship that way will help you build your influencing skills. So I think that's yeah, taking time out of our busy time and managing spreadsheets and putting up risk charts to actually sit down and actually chat with people in a relaxed setting is gold.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And one of the things that I also find very useful is because the senior leaders do not want to feel cornered into making decisions. So those informal kind of meetings are really good in terms of setting up and informing them of what's coming, rather than waiting until the governance meeting and then you spring them a very big one. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you never do it in front of other people. Do it, you know, sort of one-on-one or maybe a couple on one at the most.
Can I throw another suggestion in there? Is
Please.
that if there is somebody that you think that this person really looks up to or respects, or perhaps somebody who was in charge of the end of year bonus, and you have a good relationship with that more senior person, you know, then ask them to have a chat, so that it's seen as it's done outside of the project or the PMO.
Yeah, again, that sort of two-step approach. A couple of polar opposite organizations here. We've got the bottom left of the screen here, getting governance groups even set up in the first place. And on the right hand side, we've got everybody wanting to be in a governance group. So I feel like there's some people who should swap organizations here for 6 months, do a secondment and see how we get on. Maybe I'll start with you, Nicola, since you were just talking as well. Do you have a comment on either side around how to change that, get more people involved or get less people involved?
Well, if we are setting up a governance group, then when we're designing it, then we're thinking really hard about what is the optimum number of people that should be on it. I mean, you know, the rule of thumb is, you know, sort of 6 to 8. You know, sometimes that might need to go up to 10 if it's has very wide impact. And being very careful that those people have got very specific roles. You know, that obviously you have a sponsor. If you've got business owners, benefit owners, then they should be there. Sometimes I have seen where a particularly squeaky wheel who really shouldn't be there, we allow them to be there anyway because they're going to create more trouble outside than they are inside. So I think it should be by design. I think if you can show people a structure and say that, well, in a governance group, you know, these are the roles. You know, you have a sponsor, so that, you know, the person who is ultimately accountable. You've got the business owners of the business areas where the most impact is. you've got benefit owners, and obviously often the benefit owner and the business owners coincide. Then those are the roles we need. And I'm sorry, person X, you're not one of those. And so therefore you don't have a role on this, but obviously in a much more subtle way.
I think
Can I comment
maybe
on that,
Oh,
Mike?
yeah, go for it, Adrian. Yep.
Just picking up Nicola's theme. So often the terminology that I'll use and others will use is you have to have skin in the game. So either you are the recipient or maybe the contributor in some way to that particular initiative. But if you've got some skin in the game, then maybe you have a seat at the table because you can offer some insights and help that accountable person come up with an optimal decision. But there may be, lots of people that consider they have skin in the game. And I think this talks to the one where you maybe end up with large groups, and this uncontrolled sort of proliferation of membership is a common problem, particularly in public sector environments. I find, and I'm actually working with an organisation at the moment where we're going through a process of optimising not only the construct of all the governance groups in terms of whether they should exist or not, but also then the membership of those groups. And one of the things that we find is that there needs to be a distinction between what are members and those that have material skin in the game and have a role in informing decision making, and those that are either guests or observers or standing guests. And it's important then that that differentiation is made and there's a control of that. So the members are always there, and equally if there's regular use of proxies, maybe then you need to revisit that particular membership. But certainly those members should be there. But if there's observers that are maybe invited for one meeting and then they turn up regularly for other meetings, there needs to be control of that. And at the start of the meeting, you need to actually call the quorum together and say, actually, well, this is the quorum. If you've not on the list of members for this meeting, can you please excuse yourself? If they don't leave, well, then you pick it up afterwards on a one-on-one basis. You don't name and shame in the room. But it's a common problem that if somebody's invited to a meeting, and particularly this is a common problem where you have an invite that spans governance meetings maybe for the rest of the year. So my advice to clients is it's a pain in the ass, but set up individual meeting invites with the appropriate membership or the invitees for those meetings. So then people don't have it regularly in their calendar that they're meant to be attending that meeting, even if they've been invited only once. So those things are really important, because the more people you get in the room, and Nicola alluded to this, whether it's optimal sort of 7 or less, you get moved from what should be a focus on those material matters and a focus meeting to something that then becomes a talk fest, and you move from that sort of governance to information sharing, and that's not at the heart of governance.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, Adrian, that we want to split up those working groups from governance. And to your point earlier,
Yes.
governance is making those decisions and making it effectively, whereas working groups, discussions and sharing information. And I guess what I perceive around all these people wanting to be in governance, they're all passionate about the project, they're all excited for it, they want to be involved on the waka, all going in the same direction. But they can still do that, but do that in a working group, and they can be there to review options and endorse decisions. They can endorse decisions which then go to governance to either approve or decline. So I think there is still a place for them at the next tier down in the information sharing stage, not the governance stage.
And
I think you're right there, Mike, is that you have to find a home for them somewhere, because otherwise they may look to undermine the governance arrangement. So good point. Sorry.
Also,
You go,
additionally,
Cristine.
adding on to that, there's the concept of advisory board, right? So you can have those people who can actually contribute, and they're not in governance, but they can be a separate advisory group where in that case they, to some level, they're informed and they have the active the contribution, and they can be disarmed, when it's not necessary. So there's another technique that may be useful.
Thanks, Christine. Iain.
Yeah, look, just reflecting on Adrian's good points here, I think the risk that was highlighted there in the commentary and your own response, Mike, was the risk of enthusiastic project leaders, program leaders inviting he, she, and them into a room, a mix of governance people who are there to make decisions or at least facilitate decisions, versus a list of stakeholders who think they might have a voice. And I think, in my experience, that's a dangerous mix of people to have in the room. Particularly if the agenda is a governance agenda, that usually leads to, I think, a bit of confusion and things. So I just want to make that point that, separate out stakeholders. Stakeholders will have different influence at different points in time, but not necessarily through the journey of the initiative. Whereas, to the point that was made, governance groups are there to make sure that the future of the initiative is heading down the right track, and pulling the levers in different directions if that's not the case. Yeah.
Thanks, Iain. And then staying with you, Iain, what about the opposite scenario around we don't have governance? We don't even see the value of governance. Projects should just magically happen by themselves. What's your advice to try and change that status?
Damn, I was hoping I could dodge this one.
You'd be like, what is that still happening today's age?
Yeah, I know it. Look, well done to the person who threw this out, or persons that threw this one out. Look, it's such a difficult thing. Now, that was the one in the bottom right-hand corner.
Bottom left over here.
Oh, bottom left. Thank you. I'm just quickly reading it again. Oh, look, to me, this is classic bottom-up, kind of almost the hero mentality, and it points towards the fact that the organization as a whole has got some gaps at the higher level. So possibly to the point where there's some, the business rules are maybe lacking or misaligned in some form. The culture, therefore, then is not the best culture it could be, and all of that permeates down through the mix or through the structure into whatever initiative is, and all we get is frustration, clearly frustration. So if an organization has a purpose statement and it's true to its purpose that supports a vision statement, so we've got balance between internal and external, then you would think then the exec would facilitate, either through an EPMO, a VPMO, or whatever it might be, a kind of warming to the value influencer thing, but that should be the vehicle then that begins to support and nourish and nurture, things downstairs to remove the risk of silos. I think it must be immensely frustrating, and it just points to an organization that's got a kind of like pretty bad kind of climate associated with its culture, actually.
Can I ask, and I'll go around the panel one at a time. Iain, can you just give me one little soundbite that this person can take away in their back pocket around what is the value of governance? Why do we have governance? What is the benefit for project programs? What's your one-liner on that?
To guide the future.
Guide the future. Thanks, Iain. Christine, what's your statement in terms of why this person should have governance in their organization?
It's an enabler for the future.
Okay, thanks, Christine. Nicola.
Gosh, a one-liner. Oh, I'm hopeless at one-liners. I'm much better at waffling, even though I said waffling's a bad thing. Well, since the others have gone with the future, I would take it from a protection of risk perspective. Organizations should have stated risk appetites across multiple dimensions, and any change initiative is going to introduce risk, and who's keeping an eye on that and making sure that the executive level are aware of what risks they're facing into.
Cool, thanks, Nicola. Adrian.
Yeah, often I'm asked this very question. At the heart of governance is decision making. So The question is, why governance? Well, you want to make sure the right people are making the right decisions at the right time based upon the right information, informed by the right processes.
Thank you. I'll just add one, maybe a bit more transactional item there. I think it's great just to keep the project manager honest or the program manager honest. Governance, if the PMs are fronting up every 2 weeks or every 1 month and saying, right, here's our red, amber, green status, and here's where everything's fine, and this is going to be due this date here, this is going to be due this date here, and they turn up the next month and everything's still green, but those dates have changed by a couple of months, then governance is there to ask why or start to scratch those itches. And without governance, things can naturally just morph and slip, and next thing you know, a 2-year project turns into 20 years. Comment here, maybe we'll go to you, Cristine. Unqualified people with no industry experience saying fluffy stuff and using 100 words when 10 will do. I'm glad there's no names mentioned in here, but Cristine, do you have any experience with these sorts of people and how you can get them to consolidate?
I think, yeah, there are two sides to that. Okay, there are people that, like what we just discussed before, they shouldn't be in the governance committee and therefore they need to be kept away from it. Okay, that is as simple as that. We already addressed it. On the other hand, we have got different learning style. As a teacher myself and trainer myself, we've got to be able to capture the essence of what the person is trying to say. And I personally found driving organization performance, if you have everyone on board, and be able to have the open mind to distill some of the important message that person wanting to say, you've got a lot of influence on your side, bringing those people on board and actually, delivering the outcome that you hope to help the organization achieve.
Interesting. Nicola or Adrian, do you want to comment on that? Or maybe Iain? Anyone else got some experience around this sort of role?
I'm happy to comment. So I went through a process with a particular governance group where there was one member who was technically very proficient, was very details oriented, and was unfamiliar with the governance environment. But they had a lot to add to the decision-making process as long as they could be kind of corralled. And it took a while, but I worked with this person to almost rehearse ahead of meetings what an exception-based approach might look like. It took a while, but interestingly, after a while, if this person then started going back to a default behavior instead of focusing on those material matters or exceptions, and there was permission to do this in the room, was just to say, name exceptions, please. So it was very courteous, but it just sort of put some more guardrails and refocus them on what's important in that environment. And this was a critical learning for them, that governance is very different to stakeholder engagement or stakeholder management. And so I think that was a learning for them, and it was a switch once they actually recognized what governance was.
Nice. Yeah, I think as long as you do it respectfully and the intentions are clear, and positive intentions are clear, then people hopefully should be respectful of that.
Thanks. I'm just looking at the time. We only have 10 minutes left. Can you just get one of those really thorny questions out of the remaining ones for the panel, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Okay. So the last question, I'm going to go to you, Iain, for this. Lack of accountability, so it's the one that's on the bottom left of the screen here. Lack of accountability and competing interests. How do we get all members to buy into the same goal? Oh, again, I'll unmute yourself there, Iain. Yep.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, folks. This is another great question, and a scalable one too, I think. And I guess the panel will have some good thoughts on this one. Many years ago, I was introduced to a team charter or team contract. The word contract was kind of frowned upon by some folks, but the inference was that particularly on big initiatives when there was huge amounts of money being invested by an organization. Big teams being put together, hugely motivated people, people with high drive. And then there was a little bit of this happening at some points, I remember, in one particular phase. And people were all trying to kind of get ahead of each other and jump on top. It was almost like Tuckman's model of team dynamics being played out on stage 1 and 2. What was introduced by the project director at the time was he introduced this team charter thing, where everybody had to abide by a kind of like a set of cultural norms that included how do we make decisions, how do we identify risk, how do we communicate, etc., etc., etc. And it was really, really very simple, but really went a long way to differentiating between accountability and responsibility. Everybody in the team was responsible for delivering this mega project. The project director was accountable for the result, and his sponsor, who happened to be the CEO of this particular organization, was obviously accountable to the board for success. So there was some high stakes, and a simple tool like this project, team charter, not project charter, team charter, I beg your pardon, was so effective and worked a treat, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Iain. Nicola.
I think sort of going back to one of the things I said at the beginning, which is that really clear focus on the why. Why are we investing our organization's time and resource and attention into this? And sort of, which is often represented by benefit statements or value statements or whatever, and keeping that front and center, and anything that isn't aligned to that really it needs to be excluded from this particular initiative or portfolio. I think it's very difficult to avoid the competing interests, particularly if people see career opportunities or career risks. Human beings are humans, so that can be difficult. But I think if you just keep leading out with the why, it should help.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. I think it's very easy for us to look at our feet, right? What's right in front of us, those sort of short-term wins as individuals are all personal objectives. But if we think about the broader why we're in business, what's our strategy, how does this project actually enable this strategy to achieve it's be realized, like benefits, like you say, like value, like Iain talks to. If we can use that to help prioritize all the bits and bobs we need to work on, hopefully that's the kind of like the key to unlock or at least navigate those competing priorities.
One of the points that I'd like to raise in this particular topic is that there's very little organization process mapping going on at the moment. And quite often is because there's no clarity of the structure, and the structure changed somewhat quite, with the project initiative that doing transformation. So I think keep in mind that the project delivery should also maybe align with the organization sort of mapping, functionality mapping, and that gives a level of clarity. And that should be so from the board level, exec level, across. So this is not something that I've seen a lot in New Zealand. I think in the past, maybe there's more interest, but as agile as the transformation happened, that seems to be forgotten. I think that's something that worth keeping in mind.
Well, thanks, Cristine. Kosam, those are the questions from the floor. I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. You've been a very apt kind of question and answer person, so we'll keep you there. Right. So one of the questions that I would have for the panel as we go out is sometimes there are pet projects that come up, and these belong to someone who's very powerful, and they go beyond any standards or processes that you may have. And these do actually set a very bad example because some other people would want to follow them. How best do you think this can be managed through the governance process?
Carefully. If it's somebody's pet project and they're very high up in the organization, potentially at the very top of the organization, yeah, then that can be very difficult to navigate. I would say, coming back to that, to the strategy. So, how does this piece of work align to the strategy? And if they can demonstrate a very clear line of sight to the strategy, maybe they're seeing something that you don't. And if they can't, then if you have the sort of reporting where you say, well, here are all our strategic goals and here are all the initiatives. If you've got a section at the bottom that says other, and their project is on it, then you're making it visible, and perhaps that might influence them.
Thanks, Nicola. Any other takers?
Yeah, I might contribute on that, Kosam. In an environment where there are multiple initiatives, often it's good to have in place stage gates, and stage gates or investment gates can provide an opportunity not just at the start of an initiative to give it authority to proceed right the way through to the end, but as a project or program moves through its life cycle, checkpoints to see whether it still aligns, still contributes to strategy, and it's going to realize its benefits, but also, is it still a valid investment given there are other investments and other competing initiatives within that environment? It may not solve the problem, but through that stage gate process, you can shine the light on some of those things to actually shine a light and say, maybe this particular initiative offers less value than other competing initiatives, which are sort of in the wings, still awaiting funding.
Kosam, if I may add to that too, I think to me it's all about priorities. So if there's a enterprise value management office or something similar, then a portfolio that's getting built should be based around prioritization, amongst other things, obviously. If the pet project happens to be at the bottom of the prioritization, I have no issue with that whatsoever. But it's certainly not going to be first cab off the rank. And I would, if I was that particular leader of that EVMO, I would actually be quite willing to stand up in front of he or she, irrespective of what title I have, and articulate the case as to why the pet project is getting pushed down the priority list somewhat. Yeah. So that's a deference or a deferring tactic, I think.
And have your CV in your back pocket, Iain.
Oh yeah, of course. Always. Well said.
Well, thank you so much. We really don't want to encourage any career limiting kind of activity, but some of these things are beyond what we can discuss here. It depends on your situation, so just respond accordingly. Right, as we round up, can you just put in the chat what your key takeaways from this session was, and what else you want to hear us address in future? Right, so for this session, those who are going to be claiming PDUs, we've got 1.5 PDUs. Business acumen is 1, and PowerScripts 0.5, so you can self-claim. And coming up next is a very good segue from here. We're going to be talking about governance reporting for effective decision making. And to help us navigate that, we've got two very great people that I know, and I'm always sort of chiding with them. Is Bruce Aylward, who is the Chief Everything Officer of SODA, and Yusuf Mora, who sort of represents Microsoft-based software. So they will not only be talking about what is required for a dashboard or anything like software, for instance. They'll go beyond that into talking about what do you need to put in there to make it look good, not only look good, but be useful for the decision makers. And that sort of will segue very well from what we've been talking about. And Mike, we have a few other things that are coming up, we'll share with
Yeah, I can just give a very quick summary on that. So, say April onwards, we've got sessions that have been lined up around sponsorship. So, again, very closely aligned to this. We've got sessions lined up around personal branding, and a couple more in the works around leadership with diverse teams, and another topic around what actually good leadership looks like. So, Before we know it, we'll have an agenda or another series of events lined up between now and May, if not beyond. So looking forward to that.
Thank you, and have a lovely evening, everybody. We've just gone one minute over, not much. It's still within threshold, I guess. So have a lovely evening. Till we meet again, we'll send you some stuff. And in the meantime, I'll also send you LinkedIn profiles for the panelists so that if you have any questions or want to engage them in any other way, you can reach out to them. Thank you so much. And for the panelists, please stick around. We need to do our own post-mortem and, just see how we performed today.
Thanks, Dean. Ka kite.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see so many here.
Yeah. I can stop the recording now, right?